Hi everybody, so welcome to Colour Month. I am a huge colour lover. It's something that I'm really passionate about. I love colour and I also really love colour theory and I love teaching it. And I think it's actually really empowering as an artist to understand colour theory. And it can make you bolder and more experimental in your colour choices and really, just helps you understand how colours work in your painting. And in mixing them, it means you don't have to buy so many colours because you know how to mix the colours you have and really get the most out of them. I think some people think that colour theory is all about rules, you know, never mix this colour with this colour, never put this colour next to this colour, but that is not it at all. There's no rules, there's no bad colours, it's just understanding how colours work, just understanding the science of it. So let's get started. We've got the colour wheel here. I imagine you're all pretty familiar with this, but let's go over it anyway. So we have three primary colours, which are red, yellow and blue. They are primary colours because we can't use any other colours to mix them. Try as you might, you cannot mix yellow out of any other colours or red or blue, they just are. But we can use them to mix all of the other colours. So we also have our secondary colours, green, orange and purple, and we can see where they fall on the colour wheel that if we mix yellow and blue we get green, if we mix yellow and red we get orange, and if we mix red and blue we get purple. And every colour has an opposite colour. So this colour is literally opposite on the colour wheel. These colours can also be called complementary colours. I like to use the phrase opposite colours because it really does what it says on the tin. It's not confusing at all. But if you hear somebody say complementary colours, that's what they mean. It's the same thing as an opposite colour and they're said to complement each other. And we're going to get into this in much more detail a little bit later. But your opposite colours are red and green, yellow and purple, orange and blue. So they're opposite to each other on the colour wheel, but the way you can remember opposite colours if you're not looking at a colour wheel is think to yourself, when I'm mixing green, I use yellow and blue. I don't use any red, so therefore red is the opposite colour to green. When I'm mixing purple, I'm using red and blue. I'm not using any yellow, so yellow is the opposite colour to purple. And when I'm mixing orange, I'm using red and yellow. I'm not using any blue, so blue is the opposite colour to orange. So these colours are as far away from each other as they can be in terms of hue and on the colour palette, on the colour wheel. And these combinations of opposites are really powerful. They create a lot of contrast in the painting and they can also be really interesting when we mix them together on the palette. But first of all, I want to come back to primary colours. So theoretically, you can pretty much mix anything you need from your three primary colours plus white if you're using gouache, or the addition of extra water if you're using watercolours. However, it's not enough to just have three primary colours in your set. You really need a warm and cool variant of each. So most paint sets that you buy, watercolour or gouache, acrylics, you'll always have a couple of different yellows, blues and reds, and there's a really good reason for that. It really maximises your colour mixing possibilities. So I'm just going to show you a few that I use. So starting with the yellow, we've got lemon yellow, which is a classic cool yellow. So it's got green, blue undertones. And then we've got, this is permanent yellow deep, but if you're using watercolours, maybe something like a cadmium yellow would be very similar. So you can see they're both yellow, but there's a really big difference between them. It'd help if this brush was clean, wouldn't it? So we've got this very bright, zingy, cool yellow here. And then this yellow, which is much warmer, and this is a particularly deep yellow as well. It is called Permanent Yellow Deep. But yeah, it's a much more orangey, warmer yellow, so it's got red undertones. And we can tell just by looking at them, this looks more like green, this looks more like orange. So next on to the blues, we've got one of my, favourite colours here, ultramarine blue. If I can get the lid off. So this blue actually has red undertones, which it might not look like it, but if you think about it and where it falls on the colour palette, is this blue closer to a green or closer to a purple? And I would say it definitely feels closer to purple. Compared to, say, cerulean blue, which to me feels closer to a turquoise or a green. And Prussian blue would be another example of a green toned blue. And then we've got red, so this one is primary blue. Primary red, which has blue undertones, and this red is very bright and in your face. So again, it doesn't look like blue, but if you think, is this closer to purple or orange, it's closer to purple. And then this red is vermilion red. And we can see this is a much more orangey red, so it's got a lot more yellow in it. And we really notice these differences when we start to mix them. So when we're mixing a colour, it helps to think about the attributes of that colour. So instead of saying I want lime green or I want magenta, think I want a green that is bright and fresh and zingy. If I wanted to mix a green like that, I would pick a yellow and a blue that both have a lot of green in them. It's going to make it really very green, very bright and zingy. So I've got lemon yellow, cerulean blue, which gives us a very, very bright green. If, on the other hand, we want to mix a green that is muted and warm, earthy, maybe like an olive green, I would choose a yellow and blue combination that have got a lot of red in them, because the red's going to make it warm, but it's also going to make it more muted and earthy. So I'm going to go for this deep yellow and ultramarine, and then we get a green that is much more muted, much warmer, much earthier. And like I say, there is no good or bad colours. This isn't a good colour because it's pure, this isn't a bad colour because it's dirty or muddy. It's really, there's no good or bad colours, it's just personal taste. Personally, I don't really use a kind of a bright apple green like this in my work very often, whereas a really muted green like this I use all the time. I use this kind of warm olive green quite a lot. So that is a colour that I would use in my work. We've kind of got two extremes here with the green, and then if we mixed one cool yellow with a warmer blue, we should get a bit more of we'll get a different green that's a bit more of a mid-green, that's not as bright and not as muted, it's kind of in the middle. So you can see how it's almost colour maths, and knowing the undertone of the colour is going to help you predict what kind of colour you're going to get, and it also means your colour mixing is going to be much more efficient and a lot more satisfying, because you're going to think in my head, I want a mid-toned green, or I want a warm muted green, or I want a green with lots of yellow and a tiny bit of blue, or lots of blue and only a tiny bit of yellow. So you're going to be able to mix much more efficiently, and you can understand how things are mixing. And we can really see that with the purples. So if we mixed a red that has a lot of yellow in it, and then we're going to mix the blue, which is a lot of green tones, yellow and green, we don't normally use those when we're mixing a purple. These are going to give us a really, really muted purple. So no matter how I change the proportions of the red and the blue, it's never going to give us a bright purple. Even if I lighten it a little bit, I'm going to add a bit of water. You can see it's kind of giving us a very, very deep reddy brown. I can add more blue to it, but it's still not going to go purple. We've got kind of a grey now. So this could kind of look like a colour mixing mistake, but I actually find colours like this really useful. If you don't want to use black in your painting, or you don't have black in your set, being able to mix very dark muted colours like this are very useful. They could be used for shadows to add definition. You know, if I was painting a flower, I could use that colour for the stem, maybe I'd use that for some shadows. So there's lots that you can do with these very muted colours. And then, of course, if we have a red that has blue undertones, we have a blue that has red undertones. It's just colour math that is all going to add up to a really bright purple. And you can kind of see the difference there. Sometimes these colours are so dark and pigmented you don't really see the colour until you add a bit of white or a bit of water to them. I'll add a bit more white to this one as well, so a bit of water to this one, so you can kind of see. So yeah, you can really see a big difference between these two purples. So a question I get asked a lot is, how do I know what the undertone is of a colour? And the first thing to do is just to look at it and look how it sits on the colour wheel. So if we have a yellow like this and we look at it on the colour wheel, is this yellow looking closer to green or is it closer to orange? And it kind of fits about here, doesn't it? It looks closer to green, so we know that it's going to have those green undertones. Likewise, if we look at this colour and hold it on the colour palette, it doesn't really fit here. It looks a lot like this colour. We can see it's closer to orange, it's got the red undertones. So that's the simplest way, just to have a look at it on the colour palette. And it can be trickier with things like the blue, but again, you know, if we look at it, that is not very similar to the green, and it kind of falls about here, which is much closer to purple, so we know it's got the red undertones. Sometimes it can be tricky to determine the undertones of a colour. So the next thing to do after just looking at the colour is to just mix it with another colour and see how it behaves, and that will tell you a lot about the colour. So we've got black here, which you would imagine would be a neutral, neither warm nor cool, but most blacks actually have quite a lot of blue in them, and they can actually behave like a blue if you mix them with something else that has a lot of blue in it. So the way to test that is just to mix it and see how it behaves. So I've got some lemon yellow here. I'm going to mix a tiny little bit of black, and what we should get is a really muted green. And I actually love this colour. I use it a lot in my work. It's a really lovely kind of unexpected muted green. But there's no doubt about that, that is definitely green. So we can see that the black is behaving like a blue. It's got blue undertones. likewise, we have this red here that's got a lot of blue undertones, so if we mix the primary red with a little bit of black, we should get a really lovely muted purple. We get a really kind of rich mauve. So this is why I love colour mixing, and I really encourage people to experiment with their sets and have a smaller set of colours and really get to know all of them and how they all mix with each other, rather than having a really big set of colours and just reaching for a pre-mixed green, a pre-mixed purple, a pre-mixed grey or orange or what have you. Mix the primary colours, use black and white as well, and see what you can get, because you can get some really beautiful unexpected colours. So now let's cover opposite colours in some more detail. So just to recap, opposite colours are opposite each other on the colour wheel. So these pairs of opposite colours are red and green, yellow and purple, orange and blue. And when we place these colours next to each other in a painting or a drawing or a collage or whatever it is you do, they make each other look more bright and more vibrant. They bring a lot of contrast into a picture, and they are really eye-catching, they're really striking. And that doesn't mean that you have to put a bright red next to a bright green. You know, you could have pink is just a light red, so it could be a pink, it could be a deep red, it could be a very muted green, a very deep green. There's lots of different ways that you can experiment with using opposite colours in your work to add interest and contrast. And when you look at fine art, you see these pairs of opposite colours all the time. So I'm going to show you some examples now. So we have two paintings here by fine artists. We've got a painting of roses on the left by George Leslie Hunter, and on the right we've got a garden seen through an open door by Duncan Grant. So both of these paintings are using the opposite colour pair, red and green, and they're using them in very different ways. So looking at the flowers, we obviously have these red roses, we have green leaves, but we also have a green apple. We've got a lot of green in the background, there's green in the vase, and we also have some of the red as well, very subtly in the background. So there's some very faint pink on the surface that the vase is resting on. We've got a flower that's also resting on the table, and a tiny bit of red in the apple, and all these little bits of red and green dotted around really move your eye around the painting and make it feel very balanced. And red and green is obviously a colour combination we see a lot when painting nature, because nature is so green. So we see that in the next painting. So this one, it's the green that really dominates, and the garden is green, but so is the house. So is the door frame, the wall, the floor and the chair. So because we have so much green, so many different shades of green, that red item of clothing draped on the chair really stands out and really draws your eye and gives a focal point to the painting. And we see more subtle red dotted throughout the painting. So there are some red flowers, we've got some warm reddy areas sort of in the shadows and in the pattern on the chair, but it's really that one spot of bright orangey red that draws your eye and adds a focal spot to the painting. So in our next one we have a combination of blue and orange, again used in two quite different ways. So we've got the flowers on the left are Odilon Redon, and then we've got Eric Heckel on the right. So there's a few different colours in this picture. There is also a bit of green, there's also a bit of purple, but to me it's the combination of the blue and the orange that feels so powerful. These colours are almost vibrating next to each other. We've got these really beautiful blue flowers against that orange background, and then these very deep orange flowers. And yeah, it's just an incredibly eye-catching painting, really using these opposite colours in a very pure saturated way, and it makes a big impact. So the next painting, we've got a lot of orange and a small amount of blue. So a bit like the Duncan Grant painting we saw that was mostly green and just had that little bit of red. This one is mostly orange, and we've got some kind of reddy oranges, we've got more muted oranges, more browny oranges, peach, all different shades of orange. And then we have those two blue cups, and the two blue cups really balance out the colours and they really draw your eye. So yeah, a more subtle way of using an opposite colour to add balance to a painting's colour palette and to move your eye around the painting. We've got more orange and blue in these next paintings, but sort of in a very different way. So we've got Claude Monet on the left and Vanessa Bell on the right. And in the Monet piece, we've got that incredible orange setting sun. So we've got this really, really pure orange, and then we've got the beautiful sort of ghostly blue ships, and we've got the orange reflected in the water. We've also got it in the sky. So there's a lot of blue and orange throughout the piece, moving your eye around. And then we also have all these muted tones as well that I would guess Monet has mixed the blue and the orange together to create all these different shades of grey and beige that we would find in this kind of murky sunset scene. And then with Vanessa Bell, we've got orange and blue tones used a lot more subtly. So we've got some deeper, darker tones. And it's a really limited colour palette. So every book is either blue or orange or red. The same with the curtains and the wall and the dress and the sofa. We've got this very limited colour palette, and it makes this piece feel very atmospheric. And you can see how the warm and the cool tones are really used to suggest the light and the shadow in this piece. But if we compare it to the previous slide, those were using the colours in this really bright, punchy way. These are also using oranges and blues, but in a much more subtle, muted way. So opposite colours doesn't need to be bright and in your face. And then we have yellow and purple as a combination, which is one that I don't use that often in my work, and I don't know why, because it is a beautiful combination. So this is Felix Vallotton on the left, and then William Nicholson on the right. And yeah, they're just beautiful. It just really works and really draws the eye to have that combination of the setting sun, and we've got this quite warm purple in the sky, but then also these cool purples in the landscape as well. It just makes the piece feel very atmospheric. And then we've got this lovely still life, and again there's some green in it, there's a tiny bit of red, there's different colours, but it is the combination of the yellow and the purple that really draws your eye. And then last one, we've got Matisse on the left and Mary Fedden on the right. And again, they've got a lot of colours going on, but for me, it's the combination of the yellow and the purple that really sings and really draws your eye. And you see this combination in the Matisse painting kind of used multiple times. So we've got yellow and purple striped wallpaper, the lady's wearing a yellow and purple stripy, dressing gown, some kind of coat. We also have purple flowers. We've got a purple stripe on the floor. The lady's got a yellow bracelet on her ankle. We've got a lot of these colours kind of moving your eye around the painting. And then you also have the reds and the greens, which speak to each other as well. So this piece is very strong with complementary colours, opposite colours. And then we have this Mary Fedden piece, which has a lot of really beautiful, subtle, muted colours. But for me, it's the combination of the yellow and the purple that really sings. So we have some flowers, I think they're maybe violets or violas. And we've got fruit, possibly melon, and maybe that's a fig. So we've got quite a deep dark purple, a much lighter, more muted purple, and then we've got some beautiful yellows, which again are quite sort of muted, dirty yellows, and it just makes a really calming balance piece. It's actually quite a fun game, I find, once you start doing this, looking at fine art and looking for the combinations of opposite colours. Once you start looking for it, you will see them everywhere. So I hope that little interlude was interesting and inspiring. I've got to say, putting together that slideshow made me feel like I was back in art school, and I was loving it. So the piece by Monet really interested me because we had that really bright saturated orange setting sun, and then we also had these very moody blues, but there were also greys and beiges as well. And I wasn't there, but I would bet anything that Monet mixed the orange and the blue together to create these chromatic greys, these muted subtle colours. So when we put opposite colours next to each other in painting, they make each other more bright. And when we mix them on the palette, they actually make each other less bright. They desaturate each other. They basically cancel each other out. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. So let's go for orange and blue. And there are loads of different ways of doing this. So there's different blues, different yellows, different reds. Normally I would recommend always mixing from scratch and mixing yellow and red together to make an orange, but if you do have a tube of orange, feel free to just open that tube and go for it, because it will make this exercise easier, because you'll have the consistency that if you need more orange you just squeeze a bit more out the tube. Whereas if I have to mix more orange, I might get the proportions of the yellow and red different to the first batch that I mixed, and that will give us slightly inaccurate results with the colour chart. So from a scientific point of view, it will be more consistent if you do have a tube of pre-mixed orange. But I'm going to mix the permanent yellow with some vermilion, so we've got a very warm orange, and then ultramarine blue. And then I'm also going to need white for this, but if you're using watercolours you can just add additional water. So I'm going to mix that orange first. To make sure it's all mixed and combined. Might add a little bit more yellow to that actually, because it's looking very dark at the moment. Okay, we have orange and we've got blue there, all mixed and combined. So I'm going to paint a swatch of the orange first, and then we're also going to look at what this looks like with a bit of white. And a bit more white. So we've got our pure orange here, and then I'm going to mix a little bit of blue with it. So straight away adding that blue makes the orange darker and more muted compared to this one, and then adding a bit of white to that. Again, more muted and a bit more white. So I'm just going to speed this up and paint the rest, and you can see what happens. Okay, so we have the orange here, the blue here, and then all the colours in the middle. And I could do far more increments of this if I wanted to. So I could add smaller and smaller amounts of blue and more white and get a lot of variation. But you can see within these two opposite colours, you've got warm and cool muted colours. So we've got these kind of beautiful terracottas, we've got this really kind of bluey grey, this almost sort of grey purple colour, so we've got these really pretty colours within this sort of spectrum of colour. So we've got the two opposite colours, and then we've got bright, we've got muted, we've got dark, we've got light, so you almost have a whole colour palette here, and you could use this to paint pretty much a whole picture. And you would have all the lights and darks, warms, cools, lights and brights that you'd need. And as I said, the choice of blue and the choice of orange does make a big difference. So I'm going to do this again using a different combination of blue and orange. So this time I'm using the lemon yellow and the primary red, which is going to give us a very bright orange. With this one I didn't mix up enough orange in the beginning, which was a mistake, so I'm just going to mix a bit more up now. Make sure I've got plenty. Cerulean blue and then white. And then just mix this all, make sure it's all combined. Just trying to get bits of yellow off my brush just to make sure it's all mixed and we're not getting any streaks. Okay, so let's paint a swatch of this one. So sort of a brighter, more yellowy orange. Adding a touch of white. And then even more white. Okay, so let's add a little bit of the cerulean blue to this orange mix and see what happens. So you can see it's muted it a lot straight away. There's a lot of green in that blue, so it's made it really brown. I'm going to add a bit of white to that. And then more white there. Let's add a little bit more of the blue. So here we have another pair of opposite colours, orange and blue, and we can see the colours in the middle are really different, which comes back to the undertones that we were talking about before. So with this one we've got red undertones in the blue, we've got red undertones in the yellow, so in the middle we've kind of got these purple colours and they're also quite warm and quite muted. With this one we've got lemon yellow, which has got blue undertones, we've got the red has got blue undertones, and then this blue has got yellowy green undertones. And because it's got such strong greeny blue undertones in the yellow and in the blue, when we mix them we pretty quickly get green. This pigment was actually really powerful. I had to be very careful with how much I added because it went green pretty quickly. But I really love this one. Such a beautiful unexpected range of colours, from this kind of terracotta, these earthy greens, this deep turquoise, and these really beautiful greys and blues here. They're very sort of farrow and ball colours. I don't know if you have that paint company where you are, but here in the UK they make very posh, beautiful paints called things like Elephant's Breath, and they're these kind of like subtle, muted colours, which I really love. So you could do this all day long with different pairs of opposite colours using different combinations of primary colours to make your secondary colour, and you will get all of these different beautiful colours within them. If you're new to this, I would recommend writing down what you mixed So, you know, write down cerulean blue, and then this would be lemon yellow and primary red. And you can keep them in a sketchbook, and next time you're looking for one of these colours you can refer back to them. So maybe you're painting a pebble or a seashell and you want a kind of a purpley grey, and you can use this colour mix. Or maybe you want a kind of a sage colour and you could refer back to this colour mix. So these are really useful to do, and they're really fun, and they will help you get to know your colour set better and how the colours react and how they behave with each other. And you can see this palette actually looks really similar to the colours that we saw in that Monet painting. So my guess would be he probably used a blue a bit like this and an orange like this, and got all of these lovely colours in the middle. So the last thing that we're going to cover today is mixing some chromatic greys. And a chromatic grey is just a grey that we've made using the 3 primary colours plus white, or if you're using watercolours, plus water. Obviously the easiest and quickest way to make grey is just to mix black and white, but this gives us a grey that is very boring and it's always the same. You can make it lighter or darker, but that's it. Whereas if you're using the 3 primary colours plus white, you really have endless variation there. You know, you can make it warmer and cooler, lighter, darker. It's a grey that has a lot of personality to it, and it can also be really multi-tonal, especially if you're using watercolours. You know, you might have a grey, but there'll be little bits of the blue that are kind of granulated, that bring a sort of coolness and a shadowiness to your grey. So there's a lot you can do with chromatic greys. So I'm going to show you some examples here. So this whole piece was painted just with primary colours and white. So this isn't black, this is a really dark chromatic grey, and again I used the this chromatic grey for the shadows. So to me the shadows feel much more interesting. They don't feel flat and dead, they feel, you know, really interesting and alive because they've got all 3 colours in them. So this chromatic grey is really useful for painting things like the lampposts, the shadows, the ladies' trousers, but also for things like painting the shadows on the back of their clothes very subtly, the shadows on their hair, on the trousers. So for this I needed a grey that had quite a lot of yellow in it to capture the hair. And also we've got these colours here, so the shadows sort of inside the windows, we've got the detailing on the architecture, all mixed out of the 3 primary colours, and it makes the whole piece feel very soft and very cohesive. If I'd used black straight out of a tube, these areas would have really stood out and it just would have been a lot more punchy, and I don't necessarily want to be drawing the eye to the lampposts. I really want the eye to kind of go to the women and the whole scene to feel very soft and very balanced. So that's why I've chosen to use chromatic greys in this piece. And then this piece you've probably seen me paint, but if you haven't I will put a link in the description and then you can see me paint this whole piece and see the colour mixing I do. So here we have the dirt at the bottom, and again this is chromatic grey, so it's just a mixture of red, blue, yellow and white, and it gives you a lovely kind of multi-tonal colour. I think sometimes there's a tendency in a painting to kind of prioritise the different things you want to paint. So we want to focus on the trees, on the field, and this is just the ground, it's just dirt, it's not interesting. Or, you know, let's say you're painting some flowers on a wall and it's a grey wall and you think, well, I want to paint the flowers and I want to paint the leaves, but that grey wall is really boring, I'm just going to mix up some grey with black and white and just paint the wall and focus on the flowers. Whereas I like to give every colour in the piece equal consideration. So I do think that a dirt floor or a stone wall, you know, the pavement or the sidewalk or, you know, the tarmac of the road, those colours can be interesting. So yeah, that's just my approach to it. but you can sort of see how those chromatic greys look in practice. So let me show you how to mix them. So what you need is your primary colours, and I'm going to get a little bit of all of them out. So this is really good for seeing the versatility of your colour palette, and also for improving your colour mixing skills in terms of your subtlety. What you will find is if you're heavy-handed with a colour, you'll kind of seesaw from one colour to the other. So what we want is real subtlety and real kind of delicate mixing. I had to mix greys like this when I was at college. We just had the primary colours and white, and the teacher screwed up a bit of white paper and put it on a white background and told us to paint it, and we had to make all these tones of shadow, all these different greys, and then paint this white piece of paper on a white background. There's a bit of something on this. I think I put the wrong lid on here at some point, and it's making everything a bit brown. I'm going to start this one again. So yeah, we had to really focus on mixing all these different greys, and then really looking at what we were seeing and looking to see where are the shadows that are kind of cool and bluey, and where is areas that are more yellowy or red, where we've got light kind of bouncing off the white paper and picking up on other colours in the room. So yeah, that was a very interesting exercise and a real challenge. Okay, let's try again with the vermilion. And we have cerulean blue. And ultramarine blue. You could just do this with 3 of your primary colours, but combining the warm and cool colours gives you different results. And then we're going to need lots and lots of white. I do find white is the colour I go through the most of. And then what we want to do is just have equal amounts of all of them to start up, and then just subtly adjust as we go along. And so just a little bit of each, and whatever grey you get first, just paint a swatch, go for it. So we've got quite a cool blue grey there. So then I would think, okay, let's add a bit more red, a bit more yellow. You can say I've been quite heavy-handed with the red there, so add a bit more yellow, a bit more blue. And we've got a kind of warm purpley grey there. Add a bit more white as well. And I find just making all these subtle variations and trying different combinations and painting these swatches is really relaxing. So as you can see, I've ended up with many different shades of sludgy muted grey, which altogether they don't look great, but you can probably imagine how in a painting these would be great for painting the shadow or just adding a bit of contrast. So if everything in a painting is bright, it's for me it's too much to look at. I really like to have balance in my paintings, which is something I'm going to be talking about more in my next video. But for me, I really like having, you know, a very muted colour next to a brighter colour. So we see that in this one. You know, we've got this yellow which is very bright and acidic and zingy, and then we've got this more muted grounded colour here. Or in this piece we've got these very bright colours of the flowers, and then we've got a lovely warm grey here, lovely chromatic grey, which I've used to paint this little stoneware vase. So for me it's that contrast between the bright and the muted that I find really interesting. So hopefully this video has been interesting, and maybe you've even been mixing along, but if you haven't, go grab your paints now. Hopefully you are raring to go and ready to get colour mixing and exploring colour. To get started, the only thing you really need is a warm and cool set of primary colours and white. I do also like black. I used it in a few colour mixes here. But yeah, get experimenting with your set of colour. And if you're thinking, I know how to mix the colours, but how do I choose what colours to go in my painting? How do I know what looks good together? How do I put together a cohesive, balanced colour palette for my painting? Then I have good news. That is what we're going to be covering in the next video, which will be available next week.